The mahogany casket was being lowered when Amelia, positioned discreetly behind me, murmured, "You have a week to leave." The funeral program lay forgotten in my lap. My fingers unconsciously clenched its edges, crumpling the paper. I remained motionless, outwardly composed, feigning ignorance of her threat as Father Michael continued his eulogy, speaking of solace and serenity. My beloved son, Thomas, was gone. At 35, a sudden cardiac arrest had stolen him from me, the only person in this world who truly cared. Now, I sat beside his remains while his wife, Catherine, in her impeccably tailored black dress, shed crocodile tears, already plotting my eviction. After delivering her ultimatum, she squeezed my shoulder, a gesture of false comfort. I didn't react. Before we proceed, please remember to like and subscribe and share your most impactful life lesson in the comments below. I appreciate your engagement. She rose and greeted a new arrival. She's been incredibly strong, someone whispered behind me. Losing a spouse at her age, unimaginable. The irony burned my chest. A bitter laugh threatened to escape, but I remained silent throughout the service, the final prayer, and the subsequent procession to the reception. Upon our departure, Catherine meticulously assisted her grandmother into the vehicle, leaving me stranded. The drive home in Thomas's car, heavy with the scent of his familiar cologne, threatened to shatter me, but I resolutely focused on deciphering Catherine's strategy. At home, she welcomed the mourners with practiced grace. She delivered a heartfelt tribute to Thomas's resilience and humor, his profound love for his family. I stood silently by the kitchen island, observing. She poured wine, offered toasts, embracing guests with the practiced ease of a seasoned television widow. However, I noticed subtle changes. The family photograph near the stairs gone. His military commendation display case removed. She was already erasing him from their shared life. Once everyone departed, I went to my bedroom, the room I had occupied for 6 years. The door stood ajar, my blankets were neatly folded, the bedside lamp was unplugged. My dresser drawers were half empty, my jewelry box was missing. The wardrobe contained boxes labeled mother's belongings. Stunned, I stood frozen, my mind struggling to process this blatant act of aggression. Emerging from the bedroom, I found Catherine seated at the dining table, wine glass in hand, absorbed in her phone. Without looking up, she said, "I was merely organizing." "You moved my belongings," I stated, clearing my throat. "I can arrange for a removal company at your convenience," she offered smoothly, a saccharine smile replacing her previous indifference. I demanded to know the whereabouts of my jewelry. "A portion is secured in the safe. You wouldn't want anything to be lost during the influx of visitors," she explained. I asserted that I never authorized her to touch my possessions. She took a sip of her wine. "Thomas and I discussed this," she responded. "It's not personal. We anticipated you'd return to your sisters." "I don't have a sister." "She's aware of that," I countered, my voice rising. "This is my home," I insisted. She shrugged nonchalantly. It was his home. He would have desired us to have space for our grief. She resumed her conversation, ignoring my presence. Retreating to my room, I desperately searched my drawers, striving to maintain composure, to reason. The small box I stored beneath the bed was gone. In the closet, I located a container labeled Old Documents. Sifting through receipts, outdated correspondence, and warranty information, I eventually found it, my file containing medical records, banking statements, and my passport. My heart pounded as I continued my frantic search. The property deed, bearing my name, the deed Aaron had insisted we keep together, the deed for which I'd contributed to the down payment after his unemployment, was missing. I checked twice. Catherine's voice drifted from the hallway. "Would you prefer the leftover salad, or should I discard it?" I remained silent, my hand trembling uncontrollably. The deed was gone. The following morning, the kitchen was eerily silent, the aroma of coffee long vanished by the time I entered. Catherine sat at the dining table, engrossed in her laptop. "Good morning," she greeted me, her tone businesslike. "I'm obtaining quotes for movers." I opened the refrigerator. My labeled containers were gone, replaced with unfamiliar, meticulously organized Tupperware. I did not request movers, I stated firmly. She smiled, her gaze fixed on the screen. Indeed, but you expressed a preference for managing this at your own pace. I headed for the living room. Thomas's comfortable recliner had been replaced with a cheap leather imitation. His favorite blanket was folded and tucked behind the television stand, resembling a dog bed. "Where's Thomas's recliner?" I asked. She shrugged. It was old. It didn't suit the decor. I stared at her, my patience wearing thin. "It's been a week," I said. She responded with irritation. "It's been 9 days. I'm not going to sit in a dead man's chair, Eleanor." That was the first time she uttered his name, devoid of emotion. I stepped outside to regain my composure. Sitting on the porch steps, I contacted a solicitor, Mr. Hamilton, whom Thomas had recommended years ago when we updated our wills. His secretary informed me he could see me that afternoon. I didn't inform Catherine of my destination. I simply left. Mr. Hamilton immediately remembered Thomas. "A fine man," he remarked sadly. I explained the situation, Catherine's demand that I vacate the premises, the fact that my name was on the deed, and the document's disappearance. He inquired how long I'd resided there. 6 years, I replied, since they purchased the home. He asked for proof of my financial contribution to the down payment. I explained I had used a cashier's check and still possessed the receipt. His eyes brightened. "Then we might have a case," he stated. He explained that if my name was on the deed and I had proof of contribution, she couldn't legally evict me. He instructed me to locate the cashier's check and, if possible, the original purchase paperwork. I thanked him and drove home, my grip on the steering wheel unrelenting. Catherine was on the phone when I returned, pacing nervously near the hallway. "No, she knows nothing," she whispered into the phone, lowering her voice upon seeing me. "It's taken care of." I proceeded directly to the attic. Thomas had stored boxes there from before his marriage. Old school records, financial documents, moving inventory, all were there. Heart-pounding, I began opening boxes. Dust motes swirled in the air. I located his university files, military records, and finally, a box labeled House Purchase. My breath hitched. I pulled it out, sat on the attic floor, and began sifting through the contents. Closing statements, home insurance documents, loan approvals, and then I saw it, a manila envelope marked Final Deed. I opened it, gazing at my name, my signature, the date, notarization, and filing information. I sat there, allowing the revelation to sink in. Catherine had been bluffing. Either she was unaware of the deed or she knew and hoped I wouldn't discover it. I carefully placed the folder in my coat and descended the attic stairs. Catherine stood at the bottom of the ladder. "Looking for something?" she asked, raising her eyebrows. I met her gaze directly. "Just some old paperwork. Nothing of importance." She offered a tight smile. "Good. I wouldn't want you to become stressed." She turned and walked toward the kitchen, ignoring our silent confrontation. That night, I copied the deed and emailed a scanned version to myself, creating a folder labeled for solicitor only. I was not foolish. She thought she was one step ahead, but I now possess leverage. I needed only to proceed cautiously. Around 9 o'clock, she entered with 2 glasses of wine, saying, "I thought we should talk. Clear the air." I accepted the glass, but didn't drink. "Very well," I replied. She sat on the couch opposite me. "I know things have been strained, but Thomas always said this house was for us, for our future family," she began. I remained silent. She looked down at her glass. "I don't want things to become unpleasant. I simply wish to move forward." I observed her left ring finger, still adorned with his wedding band. She looked up. "Do you understand?" I asked. "Have you consulted a solicitor?" Her face twitched. "No. I didn't deem it necessary." I smiled. "Perhaps you should." Her eyes narrowed briefly. She took a sip of wine. "Are you threatening me, Eleanor?" I smiled. "No. Just thinking aloud." She rose slowly. "I hope we can resolve this amicably." I nodded. So do I. She walked down the hall, glass in hand. I waited until she was out of sight, then checked the scanned deed again. My name was clearly visible. She believed she had me trapped, but she didn't know what I'd discovered upstairs. The next morning, I printed 2 copies of the deed and placed them in a sealed envelope addressed to my solicitor. I delivered it to his office without prior notice, informing his assistant that it was urgent, then left before she could ask questions. Back at the house, Catherine was in the garage, clearing shelves, seemingly having already moved on from her grief. She looked up as I arrived. "Hello," she said casually, "just discarding some junk. I hope that's acceptable." I nodded and entered the house, pretending not to notice the absence of Thomas's fishing equipment. I went to my room, opened the top drawer of my nightstand, and found it locked. This drawer had never been locked before. I used a flathead screwdriver to force it open. Inside, my prescription medication bottle was gone, as was my small cash envelope. She was sending a message. She wanted me to know I had no privacy left. I sat on the bed, breathing deeply until the burning sensation in my chest subsided. Then, for the first time since Thomas's death, I opened his filing cabinet in the office. In the 3rd drawer down, I found a folder labeled Refinancing Options. Inside were recent mortgage statements with both our names, dated less than a year ago. This was significant. Catherine hadn't been added to the mortgage, not even after the refinancing. I photographed the documents and uploaded them to my cloud storage. I heard Catherine's voice in the hallway, speaking on speakerphone. "Yes, she's still here, I know. It's awkward, but she doesn't have any real claim." A pause. Then, "No, her name isn't on the current utility or tax bills. It'll be fine." I stepped into the hallway, making enough noise to signal my presence. She turned quickly, her eyes widening. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "You should be cautious about what you say in this house." "The walls are thin," I replied. I returned to the kitchen and began making coffee as if nothing had occurred. For the remainder of the day, she avoided me. Around 6 o'clock, I passed the living room and saw that she had replaced the family portrait with a landscape print, blue mountains and empty snow, devoid of human figures. I stared at it longer than intended. That night, she ordered Chinese takeout, leaving mine on the counter, no note, no gesture of courtesy. I took the food, closed my door, and secured it with a door wedge I'd kept since the previous week. I wasn't taking any chances. At 2 in the morning, I heard slow, deliberate footsteps outside my room. I pressed my ear against the door. There was no knock, only a pause, then retreating steps. In the morning, the alarm clock was flashing. A power outage lasting exactly 1 minute. I checked the circuit breaker. All switches were fine. I didn't speak to Catherine at breakfast. She offered me coffee, as if nothing had happened. I declined. Then I returned to the solicitor's office. This time, I presented Mr. Hamilton with the photographs, the refinancing documents, and copies of the deed. He reviewed them, nodding thoughtfully. "She has no legal standing," he stated. "Your name appears on the deed, and you've contributed both financially and residentially for over 6 years. If she attempts to evict you, she will fail." I inquired about filing preemptively. He nodded. "We'll draft a notice of shared ownership and prepare a legal response to any false claims. If she serves you with any documents, we'll respond immediately." I asked about my risk. He responded, "Only if you lose your documents. Keep them safe and remain calm." I drove home, a new kind of silence settling in my chest, not grief, not fear, but determination. When I entered the house, Catherine was folding laundry on the couch. She looked up. "Did you go somewhere?" she asked. "I needed some fresh air," I replied. She raised an eyebrow. "You seem remarkably confident." I smiled. "I just remembered something important." She stared, then said, "Well, I hope it doesn't complicate matters." I opened the refrigerator. My labeled food was back, in the same handwriting. That night, I heard her in the guest room, talking on the phone again. "Yes, she's behaving oddly. I may need to expedite the timeline." Another pause. "If she finds that file, we're doomed. She didn't realize I already possessed it. She didn't know the file was with my solicitor. But I knew she was concealing something far more significant than a simple property dispute. And I was about to discover what it was. 3 days later, Catherine hosted what she termed a grief gathering for Thomas's friends and colleagues, an event casually announced over coffee as if it were a casual brunch. Just a little closure, she said, pouring almond milk into her mug, pointedly ignoring the second one I had placed beside it. She didn't ask for my assistance with preparations, which was perfectly fine. She barely acknowledged me that week, except to instruct me to maintain the guest bathroom's cleanliness and to avoid mentioning personal matters if I spoke to anyone. I didn't object. I said nothing, but I observed. I watched as she prepared Thomas's old bar cart, arranging bottles as if she were hosting a cocktail party. I watched her meticulously arrange miniature quiches and imported crackers, as though we hadn't just laid him to rest. The first guest arrived shortly after 6, Thomas's work colleague, Daniel. He embraced me warmly, whispering, "He spoke of you often. He said you were his most dependable support." I nodded, fighting back tears. Others followed, neighbors, colleagues, a few of Catherine's yoga classmates. Some I knew, others I didn't. Catherine moved through the gathering like a gracious hostess, glass in hand, delivering miniature eulogies about Thomas's generosity and kindness. I stood near the back wall, observing her smile at strangers, ignoring the fact that she had stripped Thomas's room and discarded his books. At one point, someone asked about my well-being. As well as can be expected, considering I still reside here, I replied. The woman looked puzzled. I added, Thomas and I co-own the house. Catherine is handling things currently, but I still live here. Her eyebrows rose. Oh, I understood, she said it was hers. I smiled politely. An understandable mistake. An hour later, I noticed Catherine observing me from across the room. Her smile remained, but her eyes were narrowed, assessing. She approached me when the gathering quieted. May I speak to you for a moment? She asked. I followed her into the hallway. She closed the door behind us. Are you trying to cause trouble? She demanded. I responded honestly. She stepped closer. Don't play coy, Eleanor. These people don't need to hear about legal documents. I crossed my arms, ceasing my pretense. She stared intently, then composed herself. Look, this is sensitive. These are people who cared about Thomas. They are here to support me. I said, then perhaps you shouldn't host a wine party in the house you're attempting to erase him from. Her face flushed. If you don't wish to be here, you're free to leave. I smiled. Oh, I'm not going anywhere. She leaned in, whispering, just as she had at the funeral. You believe you're clever, Eleanor, but you don't understand how this works. I will ensure you regret remaining. She then resumed her gracious demeanor, greeting the next guest as if we hadn't just exchanged veiled threats. For the remainder of the evening, I remained quiet, observing, listening. I noticed one guest, a man in his 40s with a shaved head and an expensive coat, repeatedly glancing at me, seemingly trying to place me. He spoke briefly with Catherine near the hallway, then departed early. Something about his cautious, hushed manner lingered in my mind. After everyone left, Catherine cleaned silently. I offered no assistance. She didn't request any. At midnight, I passed the guest room and noticed the manila folder in her open tote bag. It hadn't been there earlier. I retreated to my room, took a surreptitious photograph of the folder through the crack in her door. The folder was labeled Document Copies Backup Plan. That night, after she showered, I slipped into the hallway and opened the tote bag. Inside were numerous folders, one labeled House Timeline, another E-Signatures 2023. I didn't take anything. I simply photographed the contents. One file contained a screenshot of a will with a digital signature I didn't recognize. The bottom corner indicated filed March 4th. Thomas died on February 2nd. He hadn't signed anything in March. I stood there, breathless, as the shower water ceased. I swiftly closed her bag, returned to my room, and waited silently as she passed, humming, wrapped in a robe. My hands still trembled, but I now possessed more than just the deed. I had proof that she was attempting to forge control. Something far larger was at play, and tomorrow I would delve deeper into the meaning of e-signatures 2023. I awoke the next morning to the sound of sniffling from the kitchen, not loud sobs, but a carefully controlled display of quiet weeping, meant to be overheard. Entering the kitchen, I found Catherine standing by the sink in her robe, clutching a crumpled tissue, staring out the window as if she were a character in a melodrama. But as soon as she noticed me, she dabbed under her eyes, forcing a brave smile, and said, "I'm sorry, sometimes it hits me all over again." Then, she placed a hand on her abdomen, subtly yet noticeably, causing me to freeze. This was new. She looked up and said softly, "I didn't want to say anything until I was certain. I'm pregnant, Eleanor." For 5 seconds, I was speechless, immobile, because it made no sense, not after everything I'd witnessed, and certainly not with the timing. "How far along are you?" I finally managed to ask. She responded promptly, 8 weeks, perhaps 9. That's when everything clicked into place because Thomas had been deceased for 10 weeks. I stared at her, attempting to mask my alarm as she placed a sonogram photograph on the table like a trump card. I picked it up, examining it closely, noting the corner, her name, the clinic, and the date printed in neat black type. Not 10 weeks prior, but 4. That's when I realized the pregnancy had nothing to do with Thomas and everything to do with control. She said, "I used a donor. Thomas and I had discussed it just in case. He wanted me to have a piece of him." In that instant, I knew it was a lie, that Thomas would have told me something so significant. I handed her the photo, without comment. She added, "I hope you understand now why stability is so crucial for the baby's sake." I realized she was constructing a sympathetic narrative, something she could use in court. The grieving widow expecting a child and being forced to share a home with an unstable mother-in-law. I nodded slowly, feigning acquiescence. She believed her performance had worked. The instant she left the room, I retrieved my phone, found the photograph of the documents in her bag, and compared the sonogram date with the file date, 4 days apart, both from the same week, both planted as evidence. I forwarded them to Mr. Hamilton with a brief message. "We need to talk." Within an hour, he called, saying, "This actually strengthens our position if she's claiming dependency or emotional distress. We can compel her to provide medical records and demonstrate timeline consistency." I asked, "What if she fabricated the entire thing?" He replied, "Then it's fraud, and if you maintain calm and continue documenting this, we'll win before it even reaches trial." I said, "She's trying to provoke me into reacting." He responded, "Then don't." And I didn't. I remained silent. I cleaned the bathroom. I folded laundry. I smiled politely at her comments like, "This baby will need so much space," or "It will be challenging raising a child in a hostile environment." Each time, she assessed my proximity to snapping. I simply nodded and remained silent. Until that Friday, when a manila envelope arrived under my door, labeled "Urgent 48-hour notice." Inside was a typed document, clearly not court-filed, stating that I had 48 hours to vacate the property due to my alleged emotional instability and personal threats. I sat staring at it, my heart pounding not from fear but from the sheer sloppiness of her attempt to deceive me, a lie I could crush with one email. Rereading it, I noted a chilling final line. "Failure to vacate will result in law enforcement involvement and potential elder neglect claims." That was her final card. She was attempting to portray me as a dangerous, unstable old woman in court, despite my having done nothing more than make toast and fold towels. Now she was forcing my departure, hoping to trigger panic, hoping I'd flee before fighting back. But I knew exactly what to do next. I had to stop waiting for her to overplay her hand. She just had. I didn't utter a word after reading the fraudulent eviction notice. I folded it carefully, placed it with the other documents Catherine had conveniently provided over the past 2 weeks, and drove directly to Mr. Hamilton's office. No appointment, no delay, because this was no longer about defending my right to remain in the house. This was about dismantling the fantasy she was attempting to create. When I sat down and presented him with the new file, his eyes scanned the final line, and he chuckled, not from amusement, but incredulity. She's threatening you with elder neglect charges while you're the one being emotionally harassed, documented, and financially manipulated, he stated. I recounted the entire story: the fake pregnancy timeline, the IVF clinic label, the donor date, the staged photographs, the overheard phone calls, and the conversations I'd baited her into, all without raising my voice. He said, "We're beyond civil conflict now. This is pre-fraud litigation territory. If she's altered financial documents or used your identity, we could be looking at criminal charges." I asked, "What's the fastest way to prove it?" He replied, "We request a discovery subpoena for her digital records, emails, text messages, medical submissions, banking records." I inquired, "Will a judge grant that?" He responded, "If we demonstrate the forged eviction, pregnancy inconsistencies, and misrepresentation of deed ownership, all documented, we don't just have a case, we have leverage." I sat there, breathing deeply, realizing that for the first time since Thomas's death, I wasn't merely surviving. I was about to turn the tables on the person who thought she could erase me. On my way home, I stopped at a print shop and ordered 3 bound copies of everything: the deed with my name, the refinancing record, the sonogram photo with the false date, the text of the eviction threat, and the names of every witness to her attempt to rewrite the house's history during the grief gathering. I labeled the spine "Case File Catherine," then placed 1 copy in my safety deposit box, 1 at my solicitor's office, and 1 beneath the floorboards of my closet, where she wouldn't find it even if she ransacked the place. Returning home that night, I found Catherine on a video call, laughing about a new real estate opportunity. "Yes, I'll have access to the property within 2 weeks at most," she told the person on the screen. I stepped into the room, ensuring she saw me. I didn't speak, simply walked to the refrigerator, took a water bottle, and stared at her until she ended the call. She turned slowly. "Do you need something?" she asked. "Just a heads up," I replied. "If another envelope arrives at my door, ensure it's court-stamped. Anything less goes directly to my attorney." She blinked rapidly, as if I'd struck her. "Are you threatening me now?" she demanded. "You initiated this legal battle, Catherine." "I'm simply maintaining legal compliance," I retorted. I left before she could respond. That night, I accessed Thomas's old email account, which he had once shared with me. His password, a favorite song lyric plus his service number, still worked. I found little of significance, mostly job applications and bills. Then I discovered a flagged folder labeled Estate. Inside were PDFs, including one labeled Draft Will February 2023. Opening it, I gasped. The signature at the bottom didn't match his handwriting. The notary seal was cropped and reused. And worst of all, the document listed Catherine as the sole heir and property owner, with no mention of me, despite being dated 1 week before his death. I printed it, my heart pounding, realizing this was the document she was hiding, the file I glimpsed in her tote. This version contained metadata from her computer name, not Thomas's, not a legal firm, just Catherine K. Drafts. I emailed the file to Mr. Hamilton, writing, "She forged his will." I didn't flinch as I pressed send. The next morning, Mr. Hamilton called before I finished my breakfast, his voice calm yet resolute. "We're filing today," he announced. That's when everything shifted from quiet defense to active offense, because now we had digital proof of forgery, proof of intent to defraud, proof of manipulated legal documents with a traceable digital signature. He outlined our next steps: filing a motion to freeze any transfer of the property title, requesting a court review of the will, submitting a fraud alert through the probate court, and placing a protective notice on the house to prevent any unauthorized sale or refinancing attempt. He added, "You don't need to serve her. The court will." I nodded, although he couldn't see me, because finally, someone else was going to speak for me. I wouldn't have to pretend I was powerless in the house I'd helped pay for. By noon, Catherine must have sensed a shift, because she became oddly solicitous, offering to prepare lunch, asking if I wanted to help her shop for baby items. When I declined, she tilted her head. "Are we good?" she asked. I smiled. "We'll see." That afternoon, while she was out, a process server called. We'll be delivering papers later today. Do not engage. I replied. Trust me, I won't. I sat on the couch with the blinds open and waited. Around 5 o'clock, she pulled into the driveway in her new SUV, 2 shopping bags in hand. The moment she stepped onto the porch, a man in a gray jacket emerged from his car, approached her, and stated her full name in a clear, practiced tone. She paused, confused, and responded, Yes. He handed her a thick envelope. You've been served. Probate fraud and property injunction. She blinked, her lips parting. What the hell is this? She asked. You'll need to read it, he replied, then departed without another word. I watched her from the living room window, holding the envelope as if it were heavy, studying the seal. Then her eyes flicked towards the house, towards me. I remained motionless, unblinking, until she entered the house with swift steps and slammed the envelope onto the dining table, opening it, scanning the first page, then the second. I heard her whisper, No, no, no. Then louder, She's lying. This is all lies. She turned to me, shouting, What did you tell them? I stood up. I didn't tell them anything. The documents did. She threw the envelope onto the floor and stormed into the kitchen, muttering, I'll fix this. This isn't happening. I said nothing. She wasn't addressing me anymore. She was addressing a world that had finally rejected her. That night, she didn't eat, speak, or even emerge from her room. The next morning, I found her pacing the front yard on the phone, hissing, Just get me a solicitor who knows how to bury this. Then, I don't care what it costs. She's just an old woman. I stood on the porch, arms crossed, letting her know I'd heard every word. 2 days later, the court date was set, a preliminary hearing to determine will validity and deed ownership. When we arrived, Catherine entered wearing a cream blazer, holding her fake sonogram photo like a prop. Her solicitor began a soft-voiced performance about widowhood, grief, and maternal protection. But Mr. Hamilton swiftly countered with irrefutable evidence, side-by-side comparisons of Thomas's real signature and the forged one she'd submitted, metadata trails from her laptop proving she'd opened and edited the document herself, plus the refinancing records that excluded her entirely. Then came the clincher, the deed, in my name and Thomas's, legally recorded, unmodified, and untouched by Catherine in any legal capacity. When Mr. Hamilton stated, Your Honor, my client has been a co-owner of this property since day one, the judge leaned forward, reviewed the file, and declared, Counselor, this is exceptionally clear. I watched Catherine's entire composure crumble, her shoulders slumping, her mouth twitching as if she wanted to scream but couldn't. The judge continued, The temporary ownership freeze is lifted. Ms. Eleanor retains legal co-ownership. All eviction claims are void. As for the will, it is subject to a fraud investigation. Catherine's solicitor whispered something quickly. She looked at him as if he'd betrayed her. I stood there, steady, silent, strong, because this wasn't a victory. It was simply the truth finally being spoken. As we left the courtroom, Mr. Hamilton remarked, Now we wait to see if she retreats or packs her bags. In the car, I checked my phone. An email from the court system confirmed full ownership recognition. I smiled, not out of spite, but relief. She could twist stories and fake photographs, but now the law knew her true nature. The house was eerily quiet the next morning. Not peaceful, but charged, like the silence before a storm. Entering the kitchen, I found Catherine already there, dressed in black as if attending another funeral, seated at the table with untouched coffee and a legal pad filled with names and phone numbers. She didn't look up. You think you've won? She asked. I poured my own coffee, remaining silent, letting her fill the silence with her own unraveling. She continued, You think just because you convinced a judge to believe your little story, that it's over? I finally turned. It wasn't a story, Catherine. It was the law. This triggered something in her. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the tile. You don't get to steal everything from me, she shrieked. I met her gaze directly. You attempted to erase me from a house I helped build, from a life I was always a part of. You used a fake will and a fake pregnancy to do it. She froze, her mouth agape, then tried to change tack. I was grieving, but it didn't go as planned. It didn't because the charade was over and we both knew it. Pack your things, I said. I'm affording you the same courtesy you never extended to me. I'm not calling the sheriff, yet. She opened her mouth to yell, then closed it again, grabbed her phone, and stormed out. I sat down and sipped my coffee, finally tasting it without the constriction of fear in my throat. For the next few hours, the house remained quiet, not just outwardly, but inwardly as well, like the first breath after months underwater. I entered Thomas's old room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed, gazing at the empty bookshelves, the walls he'd painted himself. I whispered, "We're okay now, my son. I promise." Then I opened his top drawer, untouched since the funeral, and found something unexpected, a folded sheet of paper, handwritten and signed, in a script dated 3 weeks before his death. It began, "If anything happens to me, I need you to know I'm sorry." My chest tightened as I read line after line of guilt, frustration, regret, how Madison had isolated him, how he knew she was manipulative but had tried to fix it, how he felt unable to confide in me because she made him feel like choosing sides. At the bottom, it read, "Don't let her take everything. This house was always ours, not hers. Do what you have to do, Mom." My hands trembled, not from grief, but clarity. Even in death, he tried to give me the final word. I scanned the letter into my phone and locked it in my drawer alongside the deed. By sunset, Catherine returned, her face ablaze with fury. "You'll regret this," she threatened. "I'll go to the press. I'll tell them you bullied a grieving widow." I responded, "Then I'll show them the ultrasound dates, the will metadata, and the letter Thomas left me." Her face paled, as if she'd seen a ghost, because she didn't know about the letter. She whispered, "You're bluffing." "Try me," I challenged. She turned and walked away, slamming her door so hard that a frame fell from the hallway wall. I didn't flinch. I simply reset the frame and prepared dinner as if it were any other evening. While the pasta boiled, I texted Mr. Hamilton. "Found a personal letter. Strengthens motive. I'll forward it." He replied instantly, "Send." "It's irrefutable." That night, for the first time in months, I slept with the window open, no door wedge, no spare key under my pillow, just silence and cool air. In the morning, I heard boxes being packed. By Sunday morning, the hallway outside Catherine's bedroom was lined with cardboard boxes, some labeled, some not, some with tape barely holding the flaps closed, as if packed in haste. I didn't inquire if she was truly departing. I already knew. She was out of legal options, and whatever bluff she was clinging to had crumbled under the weight of court documents and her arrogance. When she entered the kitchen, she didn't speak at first, simply opened a drawer as if searching for something that had never been there. Then she turned to me. "I'll be gone by Friday," she said. I nodded. No smile, no sarcasm, just a calm nod, as if it were a logistical meeting, not the end of a month-long war. She added, "You can have your house back." I replied, "It was never yours to give." This struck her harder than yelling ever would have. She froze, then looked away, unable to find words that wouldn't backfire. I proceeded to boil water for tea, not dramatically, but because I genuinely wanted tea. I'd learned that my most effective weapon was not reacting, simply continuing to live as if she were already gone. Later that afternoon, she had 2 friends over. Their voices echoed in the hallway as they assisted her in lifting boxes. I remained in my room while they whispered things like, "She's insane," and "How did you even live here with her?" I said nothing. These were not questions worth answering. The next morning, she made one last pathetic attempt. She left a voicemail for Thomas's old friend, Daniel, claiming I'd fabricated the entire case, that Thomas never wanted me in the house, and that I was using elder abuse tactics to seize everything from her. What she didn't know was that Daniel had already spoken to me, had already seen the court papers and Thomas's letter. He texted me her message with a single line, "She's desperate." I didn't respond. There was nothing else to say. By Thursday, her car was loaded with the last of her belongings. Her face was pale, her makeup smudged, as if she'd finally allowed herself to acknowledge this wasn't merely a legal setback. It was personal, public, and permanent. That morning, she stood at my door, clutching her final bag. "You don't have to do this," she pleaded. "Neither did you," I replied. She recoiled, clearly unprepared for my unwavering response, expecting drama, perhaps screams or tears, anything to give her one more reason to portray me as the villain. But I stood calm and still, watching her grapple with the truth in real time, that she'd played every card, spun every lie, and ended up precisely where she'd begun, standing on a doorstep she never owned, facing a future she couldn't sell. I opened the door. "You have until midnight," I stated. "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked, her voice tight with desperation. "Anywhere that isn't here," I responded and closed the door. Not out of cruelty, but because it was finally over. I watched from the window as she stood frozen on the porch for a full minute before walking to her car, slamming the trunk, and driving away without a backward glance. I didn't cry, cheer, or feel triumphant. I simply felt finished. As the sun set, I switched off the porch light, locked the door, and for the first time in months, allowed myself to sit in the quiet without listening for her footsteps or watching my back. She was finally gone, and the house was mine again, clean and unclaimed. I thought that was the end. Then I walked into the living room and saw a small, unlabeled silver flash drive on the coffee table, sitting innocently like bait. My stomach churned. Catherine never left anything behind unless she intended it to be found. I stared at it for a long time, not touching it, not moving, because I knew this wasn't accidental. Not after everything she'd done, not when every action was calculated and cloaked in false sincerity. I considered ignoring it, discarding it, pretending it didn't exist. But after everything I'd endured, I wasn't going to leave this story with a loose end. So I plugged it into Thomas's old laptop, the one she'd avoided because, she claimed, it reeked of dust and grief. I waited as the screen illuminated. One folder, no password, a single file named Open Me. Inside was a video. Initially grainy, it became clearer as the camera steadied, revealing Catherine seated in Thomas's home office, in the same chair I'd just used to check my email that morning. She looked directly into the webcam. "If you're watching this, then either I'm gone or you believe you've won," she said, her tone calm yet smug, as if she were still playing chess in her mind. "I did what I had to do," she continued. "And perhaps I crossed a line. But you were never meant to stay here forever, Eleanor. You were a temporary resident, a guest who overstayed your welcome." She leaned forward, her eyes hardening, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Thomas wanted to ask you to leave before he died. He just lacked the courage to say it." I paused the video, my jaw clenched, my heart pounding, because even now she was attempting to sow seeds of doubt, to undermine the one thing she could never take, my bond with my son. I resumed playback. "I told him we could build something if we had space, if he could finally let go of the past," she said. "But he was weak. He couldn't sever the ties. So I had to do it for him." She smiled, as if this were some kind of triumph, as if isolating him from me was an act of love rather than control. She concluded, "You can keep the house, Eleanor, but you'll never forget this." The screen went black. I sat in the ensuing silence, not angry, not even surprised, because this had always been her, controlled, cruel, always needing the final word. But what she didn't know was that I already possessed the one thing that mattered, Thomas's handwritten letter, the one she could never fake or overwrite, the one where he said, "I'm sorry," and told me the truth she'd spent months trying to bury. I retrieved the letter from my drawer, placed it beside the still image of her face on the laptop, and felt nothing but peace. In the end, it wasn't about proving who was right. It was about surviving long enough to see her lose control. I ejected the flash drive, tossed it in the trash, and deleted the file from the laptop, not out of fear of her lies, but because I no longer needed reminders. The war was over. The house was quiet. Every room was finally mine again. That evening, I unpacked the last of my belongings from the boxes she'd once labeled for removal, placed Thomas's photograph back on its shelf in the entryway, lit a candle in the kitchen, and sat at the table alone, not lonely, just still, just present, just free. Sipping my tea, listening to the silence that no longer carried tension or fear, I looked out the window at the porch she'd once tried to claim and whispered, "My house, my rules," smiling because, for the first time since the funeral, I could breathe in a space that belonged entirely to me. Not because I'd fought for it, but because I'd never let her take it.